You know, there's a peculiar thing about old photographs. They hold moments frozen in time, but they can't tell you what happened after the shutter clicked. My name is Louise. I'm 73 years old now, and I'm sitting here in my kitchen, the same kitchen where I've made thousands of meals for my children and grandchildren, holding a photo of myself when I was 8 years old. Such a small girl with big eyes, wearing a dress my grandmother had sewn for me. I remember that dress. It was blue with tiny white flowers. My hands shake a little as I look at this picture. Not from age, though Lord knows I've earned every one of these wrinkles. They shake because I know what happened to that little girl just weeks after this photo was taken. The woman who was supposed to love and protect me sold me like I was a bottle on a shelf. I've carried this story for 65 years, locked it away in the deepest parts of my heart, only letting it out in therapy rooms and late-night conversations with my husband. But lately, I've been thinking about all the children out there who might be living through what I lived through. All the little ones who think they're worth nothing more than what someone can get for them. And I've decided it's time to speak up. This isn't an easy story to tell. My voice might crack, and I might need to pause now and then to collect myself. But it's necessary. We need to break these cycles of pain and silence. We need to honor those who are still trapped in situations they can't escape from. And maybe, just maybe, someone watching this will recognize the signs and help a child who needs it. If you're watching this, and you've survived family betrayal, I want you to know you're not alone. Leave a comment if you feel comfortable enough with details, but just to let others know they're not walking this path by themselves. Sometimes, knowing you're not the only one who's been through something like this can be the lifeline someone needs. I suppose I should start at the beginning, though beginnings are never as clear-cut as we'd like them to be. My story starts with a mother who loved something else more than she loved me. And it ends well. It doesn't really end, does it? But it leads to now, to me sitting here, a grandmother myself, finally brave enough to speak the words I couldn't speak for so many years. The hardest part about telling this story isn't the memories themselves, though they're painful enough. It's the knowledge that somewhere out there, my mother might still be alive. She'd be 94 now if she is. I haven't seen her since I was 21, the day I told her I forgave her but couldn't have her in my life anymore. That was the last time I looked into the eyes of the woman who gave birth to me and then gave me away for the price of a bottle. You might wonder why I'm telling this story now, after all these years. Well, last week I was at the grocery store, and I saw a little girl. She couldn't have been more than 7 or 8, about the age I was when it happened. She was standing next to a woman who was clearly intoxicated, swaying slightly as she counted out change for a bottle of cheap wine. The little girl had that look, that hollow, watchful look that children get when they've learned to be their parents' caretaker instead of the other way around, and something in me just broke open. I came home and told my husband, I need to tell my story. He held me while I cried, like he has so many times over our 45 years together. He's heard this story in pieces, in the middle of the night when nightmares wake me up, in therapy sessions he's attended with me. But he understood that this time was different. This time, I need to tell it not just for me, but for that little girl in the store, and for all the little girls and boys who are living in homes where love is conditional and safety is never guaranteed. So here I am, Louise, 73 years old, grandmother of 6 beautiful grandchildren who will never ever know the kind of fear I knew as a child. I'm telling this story with my voice steady, but my heart full of the pain that never quite goes away. Because some wounds don't heal completely, they just become part of who you are, and you learn to live with them, to grow around them like a tree grows around a fence until the metal becomes part of the wood. I need to paint you a picture of what life was like before that terrible night. You see, when you're a child, you don't know your life isn't normal until someone shows you what normal looks like. For me, normal was the smell of whiskey on my mother's breath when she tucked me in at night, if she remembered to tuck me in at all. My earliest memory is from when I was about 4 years old. I woke up in the middle of the night, calling for my mama because I'd had a bad dream. The apartment was dark and quiet, too quiet. I padded barefoot across the cold linoleum floor, checking her bedroom, the bathroom, even looking behind the couch where she sometimes passed out. She wasn't there. I was alone. I remember climbing onto a kitchen chair and turning on the light, then sitting at our wobbly table and waiting. The clock on the wall ticked so loudly in that empty apartment. Tick, tick, tick. I watched the hands move, though I couldn't tell time yet. I just knew that when the big hand moved, time was passing, and maybe Mama would come home. She did come home, eventually. The sun was coming up, painting the kitchen walls a pale yellow, when I heard her key scratching at the lock. It took her 3 tries to get the door open. When she finally stumbled in, her lipstick was smeared, her hair was a mess, and she smelled like cigarettes and something sour. She looked at me sitting there at the table and started crying. "Oh, baby," she slurred, dropping to her knees and pulling me into a hug that was too tight. "Mama's so sorry. Mama's so sorry." That became our pattern. She'd disappear, I'd wait. She'd come home crying and making promises she couldn't keep. "I'm gonna do better, Louise. I'm gonna be the mama you deserve." But the bottles always won. They always won. By the time I was 6, I'd learned to take care of myself pretty well. I could make a peanut butter sandwich, pour my own cereal if we had any, and I knew which neighbors would give me food if I knocked on their door and said I was hungry. Mrs. Chen in apartment 3B always had rice and vegetables. Mr. and Mrs. Rodriguez in 3D would invite me in for beans and tortillas. They'd look at me with such sad eyes, but they never said anything bad about my mother. At least not to me. School was my escape. I loved school with a desperation that my teachers probably found puzzling. I was always the first one there in the morning, waiting outside the doors until they opened. My teacher, Miss Patterson, was young and kind. She had soft brown hair that she wore in a ponytail, and she smelled like flowers. Sometimes she'd let me help her set up the classroom in the morning, and we'd talk about books and numbers and all sorts of things that had nothing to do with empty apartments and mothers who chose bottles over babies. I was a good student, eager to please, eager to learn, eager for any scrap of positive attention. I'd raise my hand for every question, volunteer for every task. "Louise is such a helpful child," Miss Patterson would tell my mother on the rare occasions she showed up for parent conferences. My mother would nod and smile, playing the part of the concerned parent, and I'd feel this little spark of hope. Maybe this time would be different. But there were signs that things were getting worse. The electricity got shut off twice that year because Mama forgot to pay the bill, or couldn't pay it because she'd spent the money on other things. We'd live by candlelight for days until she could sweet-talk the utility company into turning it back on. The refrigerator would be empty, except for bottles of beer and maybe some condiments. I became an expert at making meals out of nothing. Ketchup sandwiches, mayonnaise on crackers, sugar water when there was nothing else. The neighbors started whispering more. I'd catch fragments of conversations that would stop abruptly when they noticed me. "That poor child. Someone should call. It's not right." But this was 1958, and people minded their own business more back then. Besides, my mother could be charming when she was sober. She had this way of explaining things that made people back off. "Oh, you know how kids are, always so dramatic. We had plenty of food. Louise just likes to visit because she's social." I started noticing the men more too. Different men would come to our apartment, especially on the weekends. They'd bring bottles, and Mama would laugh too loud at their jokes. Sometimes I'd wake up and there'd be a stranger in our kitchen, drinking coffee and looking at me like I was a problem to be solved. Mama would rush to introduce us. "This is my daughter, Louise. Louise, say hello to Uncle Ray. Or Uncle Steve. Or Uncle whoever." They were never around long enough for me to remember their names. One night, I woke up to the sound of breaking glass and shouting. A man's voice, angry and slurred. My mother's voice, high and frightened. I pulled my pillow over my head and sang quietly to myself, a lullaby my grandmother had taught me before she moved away to live with my aunt. "Hush, little baby, don't say a word." I sang it over and over until the shouting stopped and the door slammed. When I came out of my room the next morning, Mama was sitting at the kitchen table with a bruise on her cheek. She was drinking coffee with shaking hands, and there were broken pieces of a green bottle swept into a corner. She looked at me, and for just a moment, I saw something in her eyes that scared me more than the shouting had. It was like she was drowning, and she knew it, and she was too tired to keep fighting. "Mama?" I said, my voice small. She tried to smile. "Hey, baby girl, you hungry? I think we've got some crackers somewhere." That was about 6 months before it happened. 6 months before the night she decided I was worth less than what was in those bottles. Looking back now, I can see she was spiraling. The drinking was getting worse, the men were getting rougher, and the periods of sobriety were getting shorter and shorter. But I was 8 years old. All I knew was that my mama was sick a lot, and sad a lot, and sometimes she looked at me like I was the only good thing in her life, and sometimes she looked at me like I was the reason for all her problems. The family knew things were bad. My grandmother, my mother's mother, had moved 2 states away to help my aunt with her new baby. She'd send letters sometimes, asking how we were doing. Mama would dictate responses to me, painting a picture of a life we weren't living. "Tell her we're doing just fine. Tell her you're getting all A's in school. Tell her I got a job at the department store." Lies, all lies. But I wrote them down in my careful child's handwriting because Mama asked me to. The irony is that there were moments, scattered throughout those dark years, when I could see the mother she could have been. When she was sober, really sober, she'd brush my hair and tell me stories about when she was a little girl. She'd help me with my homework, and we'd bake cookies from scratch, laughing when they came out burned on the bottom. She taught me to dance, holding my hands and spinning me around our tiny living room to songs on the radio. In those moments, I loved her so fiercely it felt like my chest might burst. But those moments were like soap bubbles, beautiful, iridescent, and impossibly fragile. The slightest thing would pop them. A phone call from one of her friends, a commercial for beer on TV, the sound of laughter from the bar down the street. And then she'd get that look in her eyes, that thirsty look, and I'd know I was losing her again. The night it happened started like any other bad night. It was February, and cold, the kind of cold that seeps through the walls of old apartments and settles into your bones. I remember I was wearing my favorite nightgown, the flannel one with little pink roses on it. It was getting too small for me, but I loved it anyway. Funny how we remember these little details, isn't it? Like our minds take snapshots of the moments before everything changes. Mama had been drinking since noon. I knew because I'd come home from school for lunch and found her at the kitchen table with a half-empty bottle. She'd been crying, her makeup running in black streams down her cheeks. "Go back to school, Louise," she'd said without looking at me. "Just go back to school." So I did. What else could I do? I was 8 years old. When I came home after school, she was worse. Not angry drunk or sad drunk, but something else. Desperate drunk. She kept pacing the apartment, looking out the window, checking the clock. She'd pulled all our coats out of the closet and thrown them on the couch like she was looking for something. The phone rang twice, and both times she grabbed it before the first ring finished, talking in low, urgent whispers. I made myself a butter sandwich for dinner and did my homework at the kitchen table, trying to be invisible. That was another skill I'd developed, the ability to make myself small and quiet when Mama was in one of her moods. I'd learned to breathe shallow, move carefully, exist without taking up space. Around 7 o'clock, she suddenly focused on me, really looked at me for the first time that day. "Louise, baby, go wash your face and brush your hair." "Why, Mama?" "Just do it. And put on your church dress. The green one." My stomach clenched. We never went anywhere at night, especially not anywhere that required church clothes. "Where are we going?" She was already moving, grabbing my coat, looking for her purse. "To see a friend. A nice friend who wants to meet you. Hurry up now." I did as I was told because that's what you do when you're 8 and your mother is the only person you have in the world. I washed my face with cold water because the hot water heater was broken again. I brushed my hair and put on the green dress, which was also getting too small. The sleeves barely reached my wrists anymore. When I came out of the bathroom, Mama looked at me with those glassy eyes and tried to smile. She'd put on lipstick, bright red, but her hand must have been shaking because it was crooked. "You look pretty, baby. Real pretty. Come on, we don't want to be late." The walk seemed to take forever. We lived on the 3rd floor, and Mama held my hand too tight as we went down the stairs. Her palm was sweaty despite the cold. Outside, the February wind cut right through my coat. I remember thinking my legs were going to freeze because I was only wearing thin tights under my dress. We walked for maybe 10 blocks. Mama kept checking addresses, looking at numbers on buildings. The neighborhood got worse the farther we went. Fewer streetlights, more broken windows. Groups of men standing on corners watching us pass. Mama walked faster, pulling me along. Finally, she stopped in front of a narrow house, squeezed between two larger buildings. The paint was peeling, and one of the front windows was covered with cardboard. There was no number on the door, but Mama seemed to know this was the place. She stood there for a moment, still holding my hand too tight, and I could feel her trembling. "Mama?" I whispered. "Can we go home?" She knelt down then, right there on the dirty sidewalk, and grabbed my shoulders. Her breath smelled so strong of whiskey, it made my eyes water. "Louise, baby, you need to be good, okay? You need to be real good and do whatever the nice man says. Can you do that for Mama?" I nodded because her fingers were digging into my shoulders and her eyes were wild, and I was scared. More scared than I'd ever been in my life. She knocked on the door. 3 knocks, then 2, like it was a code. We waited. I could hear my heart beating so loud I was sure Mama could hear it too. Then the door opened, and a man stood there. He was big, with a belly that hung over his belt and gray stubble on his face. He looked at Mama, then down at me, and smiled. But it wasn't a nice smile. It was the kind of smile that made me want to hide behind my mother's skirt. "This her?" he asked. His voice was rough, like he'd been smoking for 100 years. Mama nodded. She pushed me forward a little. "This is Louise. Louise, say hello." I couldn't speak. My throat had closed up. The man laughed, a sound like grinding gears. "Shy one, ain't she? That's all right. Come on in out of the cold." The house smelled bad, like old food and unwashed clothes and something else, something sharp and chemical. The front room was dim, lit by a single lamp with a torn shade. There was a couch that sagged in the middle and a coffee table covered with empty bottles and overflowing ashtrays. The man closed the door behind us, and I heard the lock click. That sound, that little click, it was like a judge's gavel coming down. Final. Decided. "You got it?" Mama asked. Her voice was high, desperate. The man walked over to a cabinet and pulled out a bottle. Not just any bottle, a full, unopened bottle of whiskey. The gold label caught the light. Mama's eyes fixed on it like it was the Holy Grail. "Right here," the man said. "As promised. Good stuff too, not that rotgut you've been drinking." Mama reached for it, but he pulled it back. First things first." He looked at me again, and I pressed closer to Mama's side. "She's a pretty little thing. Skinny but pretty. How old did you say?" 8, Mama whispered. "She's 8. 8. He nodded like this was important information. "That's good. That's real good. And she's clean? Healthy?" "Yes." Mama's voice was barely audible now. "She's a good girl. Does well in school. Never gives me any trouble." They were talking about me like I wasn't there. Like I was a piece of furniture they were negotiating over. I tugged on Mama's coat. "Mama, I want to go home. Please, can we go home?" She looked down at me, and for just a second, I saw something break in her eyes. Some last little piece of the mother she used to be, the one who danced with me in the living room and told me stories. But then she looked back at the bottle in the man's hand, and that piece was gone. "Louise, baby," she said, kneeling down again. "You're going to stay here for a little while, with Mr. Carl. He's going to take care of you." "No." The word exploded out of me. "No, Mama, please, I'll be good. I won't ask for food anymore. I won't complain about the cold. Please, don't leave me here." But she was already standing up, already backing toward the door. The man, Mr. Carl, handed her the bottle, and she clutched it to her chest like a baby. Like it was more precious than the actual baby she was leaving behind. "Mama," I tried to run to her, but Mr. Carl grabbed my arm. His hand was big and rough, and hurt where he gripped me. "Mama, don't go! Please don't go!" She was at the door now. She looked back once, and I'll never forget her face. It was empty, like she'd already erased me from her life. "Be good, Louise," she said. And then she was gone. I screamed. I screamed and fought and tried to get to the door, but Mr. Carl held me back. Now, he said, his voice fake, gentle. "None of that. You're going to be staying here for a while, and we're going to get along just fine." He dragged me farther into the house, into a back room that smelled even worse than the front. There was a mattress on the floor and not much else, a bucket in the corner, a single window, painted shut and covered with bars. "This is your room," he said, pushing me inside. "You'll stay here until I need you. Someone will bring you food later. Maybe, if you're quiet." He shut the door, and I heard another lock click. I threw myself at the door, pounding with my small fists, screaming for my mama, for anyone, for help. But no one came. No one ever came when children screamed in that neighborhood. I don't know how long I cried. Eventually, I exhausted myself and curled up in the corner farthest from the mattress, which looked stained and smelled terrible. I was cold. So cold. My church dress wasn't meant for sleeping in, and there were no blankets. I tried to understand what had happened. My 8-year-old brain couldn't process it. Mama had left me, traded me, for a bottle. I kept thinking she'd come back, that she'd realize her mistake and come bursting through that door and take me home. I'd forgive her. I'd forgive everything if she just came back. But she didn't come back. Not that night. Not the next day. Not ever. As I sat there in that cold, dark room, I could hear voices from other parts of the house. Men's voices, mostly. Sometimes laughter. Sometimes other sounds that scared me, even though I didn't understand them. Once, I heard another child crying. A boy, I think. That scared me most of all because it meant I wasn't the only child in this horrible place. I need to be careful here about what I share. There are things that happened in that house that a child should never experience, and I won't give those darkness-filled details the power of words. What I will tell you is what it felt like to be 8 years old and suddenly realize that the world was not safe, that mothers could betray you, and that some people saw children as things to be used rather than treasures to be protected. That first night felt like it would never end. I stayed curled in my corner, too afraid to move, too afraid to sleep. Every sound made me jump. Footsteps in the hallway, doors opening and closing, muffled voices through the thin walls. I wrapped my arms around my knees and made myself as small as possible, thinking maybe if I was small enough, they'd forget I was there. When morning finally came, pale light seeping through the barred window, the door opened. It wasn't Mr. Carl. It was a woman, thin and tired-looking, with stringy blonde hair and bruises on her arms. She set down a plate with a piece of bread and a cup of water without looking at me. "Eat," she said, her voice flat. "You'll need your strength." "Please," I whispered. "Please, can I go home?" She finally looked at me then, and her eyes were the saddest thing I'd ever seen. "There's no going home, honey. Best you learn that now." She left, locking the door behind her. I didn't eat the bread that day, or the next. I was too sick with fear and grief to even think about food. But by the third day, hunger won. I learned that you can get used to almost anything when you have no choice. That's a terrible lesson for a child to learn, but it's true. The days blurred together in that room. Sometimes Mr. Carl would come in, always smelling of alcohol and cigarettes. He'd look at me, make comments about how I needed to eat more, put some meat on my bones. Sometimes he'd bring other men with him, and they'd talk about me like I was livestock. I learned to pretend I was asleep when I heard footsteps approaching. Sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't. There were other children in the house. I was sure of it now. I could hear them sometimes, crying, whimpering, moving around in rooms nearby. Once, when the woman brought my daily bread and water, I worked up the courage to ask her, "Are there other kids here?" She paused at the door. "Don't ask questions you don't want answers to." But I already knew the answer. I wasn't the only child whose parent had made an unthinkable trade. We were all trapped in this nightmare together, separated by thin walls and locked doors. After about a week, they moved me to a different room. This one had 2 mattresses on the floor, and there was already a girl there. She was maybe 10 or 11, with dark hair and hollow eyes. She looked at me when they pushed me in but didn't say anything. We sat in silence for a long time. Finally, she spoke. "What's your name?" "Louise." My voice came out as a croak. I hadn't used it much lately. "I'm Sarah." She pulled her knees up to her chest, mirroring my position. "How long have you been here?" "I don't know. A week, maybe?" Time had become meaningless. She nodded. "It gets easier." "Does it?" "No." She shook her head. "But you learn to go somewhere else in your head. Somewhere they can't touch." Sarah became my lifeline in that place. She'd been there for months, and she taught me the rules. When to be quiet. How to make yourself invisible. Which of the adults were more dangerous than others. She showed me how to save half my bread to make it last longer, how to catch rainwater from the window to wash my face, how to stuff rags under the door to keep the cold out. She also told me about the others. There were at least 4 more children in the house, she said. All of us there for the same reason. Parents who chose their addictions over their children. Parents who saw us as currency. "My mom told me it was just for a few days," Sarah said one night, whispering in the dark. "Said she'd come back for me as soon as she got clean. That was 6 months ago. Do you think she'll come back?" Sarah was quiet for so long I thought she'd fallen asleep. Then she said, "No. Do you think yours will?" I thought about Mama clutching that bottle, the empty look in her eyes as she walked away. No. We made escape plans, Sarah and I. Elaborate, impossible plans that we knew would never work but talked about anyway because it gave us hope. We'd break the window and squeeze through the bars. We'd steal the keys when they brought our food. We'd scream so loud the neighbors would call the police. But we both knew the truth. The windows were painted shut and barred. They were too careful with the keys, and the neighbors in that part of town had learned not to hear children screaming. One night, about 3 weeks after I'd arrived, we heard a commotion in the house. Shouting, running feet, the front door slamming. Sarah and I pressed our ears to the door, trying to hear what was happening. Then we heard something that made my heart race. A child's voice, high and desperate. "I won't go back, I won't go back." It was one of the other children, a boy, from the sound of it. He'd somehow gotten out of his room and was trying to escape. We heard Mr. Plies and Carl cursing, heard the woman screaming at someone to grab him, then the sound of a struggle, a cry of pain, and silence. We never saw that boy, never heard him again. Sarah and I didn't talk about what might have happened to him, but we both knew. Some lessons you learn without words. The worst part wasn't the fear or the hunger or even the abuse. It was the erosion of hope. Every day, a little more of it died. Every day, I believed a little less that someone would come for me, that I mattered to anyone, that I was worth saving. I thought about my teacher, Miss Patterson, sometimes. Did she wonder where I was? Did anyone at school ask about Louise, the eager little girl who always raised her hand? Or had I just disappeared, like I'd never existed at all? I thought about Mama too, of course. Every night, I'd lie on that stained mattress and wonder where she was. Was she thinking about me? Did she regret what she'd done? Or was she too lost in her bottles to even remember she'd once had a daughter? Sarah and I developed a routine to survive. In the mornings, we'd exercise in our small space, running in place, doing jumping jacks, anything to keep our bodies moving. We'd tell each other stories, making up elaborate tales about princesses and dragons and faraway kingdoms where children were treasured and protected. We'd sing songs quietly, harmonizing on lullabies and church hymns we both knew. We held each other when the fear got too bad, 2 lost children trying to keep each other afloat in an ocean of neglect and abuse. About a month into my stay, something changed. Mr. Carl started talking about moving us. All of us. He'd come into our room, looking nervous, checking the window, muttering about cops and nosy neighbors. The woman who brought our food seemed more anxious too, rushing in and out, barely speaking. "Something's happening," Sarah whispered one night. "They're scared." She was right. The whole house felt different, charged with a nervous energy. We heard more arguments, more doors slamming. Once, we heard Mr. Carl on the phone, his voice angry and frightened. I don't care what you heard. We're not moving them until I get my money. Hope, that dangerous thing I'd been trying to kill, sparked back to life. Maybe someone was looking for us. Maybe someone had noticed children disappearing. Maybe, just maybe, we weren't as forgotten as we'd believed. That hope would prove to be justified, though not in the way I expected. Someone was looking for me. Not the police, not child services, not even my mother. But someone who loved me was searching, following a trail of rumors and whispers, determined to find me before it was too late. But I didn't know that yet. All I knew was that something was changing, and change, in a place like that, could mean salvation or something worse. Sarah and I held hands in the dark and waited to see which it would be. The morning everything changed, started like every other morning in that horrible place. Weak sunlight through the barred window, the sound of footsteps in the hallway. Sarah and I sitting up on our mattresses, waiting to see if food would come. But this morning was different. The footsteps were running. Urgent. And there were voices, lots of voices, not just the usual 2 or 3. "Pack everything up." Mr. Carl's voice boomed through the thin walls. "Now, we're leaving in an hour." Sarah grabbed my hand. We'd been waiting for something to happen, and now it was. But was this rescue, or were we being moved somewhere even worse? We could hear crashes and bangs as people threw things into boxes. The woman who brought our food burst into our room without knocking. "Get up," she snapped. "Both of you, put your shoes on." We didn't have much to pack. Just the clothes we'd been wearing when we arrived, now dirty and too small. My green church dress was stained and torn at the hem. Sarah's jeans had holes in the knees from where she'd fallen trying to escape once, early in her captivity, before she'd learned that running only made things worse. They herded us into the front room with the other children. It was the first time I'd seen them all. There were 6 of us total. The youngest was maybe 5, a little boy with white blonde hair who clung to an older girl's hand. The oldest was a boy about 12, tall and thin with angry eyes. We all looked the same, really. Dirty, scared, hollow-eyed, forgotten children who'd learned not to cry because tears didn't bring help. Mr. Carl was pacing, sweating despite the February cold. He kept going to the window, peering through the dirty curtains. "Where is he?" he muttered. "He said he'd be here by now." That's when we heard it. A car pulling up outside. Then another, then voices. But not the kind of voices we were used to. These were different, authoritative, official. "Police!" someone shouted. "Open up!" The panic in the room was instant. Mr. Carl cursed and ran toward the back of the house. The woman screamed. And suddenly, beautifully, the front door exploded inward. But it wasn't just police who came through that door. Behind the uniformed officers was a small woman with gray hair pulled back in a bun, wearing a worn winter coat and the fiercest expression I'd ever seen. My grandmother, my mother's mother, Agnes Thompson, all 5 feet 2 inches of her, pushing past police officers like they were children. "Louise!" Her voice cut through the chaos. "Louise Marie Thompson, where are you?" I couldn't move, couldn't speak. It had been over 2 years since I'd seen her, since she'd moved away to help my aunt. But there she was, real as daylight, scanning the room full of frightened children until her eyes found mine. "Oh, my baby." Her voice broke. She pushed past everyone, dropped to her knees in front of me, and pulled me into her arms. She smelled like lavender soap and peppermint candy, just like always. "My sweet girl, I'm here, Grandma's here." I finally found my voice, though it came out as barely a whisper. "Grandma?" "Yes, baby, it's me. I've got you. You're safe now." But I couldn't believe it, couldn't trust it. I'd dreamed of rescue so many times, only to wake up still trapped. "Is this real?" She pulled back and cupped my face in her worn hands. Her eyes, the same blue as Mama's but clear and steady, looked into mine. "It's real, Louise. I promise you, this is real. I'm taking you home." The police were arresting Mr. Carl and the woman. Other officers were talking to the children, trying to figure out who they were, where they belonged. But Grandma didn't let go of me. She held me tight while she talked to a policeman with kind eyes who wrote down everything she said. This is my granddaughter, Louise Thompson. She's been missing for 5 weeks. Her mother, my daughter Patricia, Grandma's voice hardened. She sold her, traded her to these monsters for alcohol. The policeman's face went tight. Do you know where Patricia is now, ma'am? No, but I'll find her. Right now, I just need to get my granddaughter somewhere safe. Sarah was standing nearby with a social worker. I reached for her hand. This is Sarah. She's my friend. She took care of me. Grandma looked at Sarah, and her face softened. Thank you, sweetheart. Thank you for looking after my Louise. Sarah squeezed my hand. She looked after me too. They had to separate us then. Sarah had to go with the social workers, and I had to go with Grandma. I started to panic. Sarah was the only good thing in that terrible place. I couldn't lose her too. I'll find you, Sarah promised as they led her away. When we're grown up, I'll find you. Grandma wrapped her coat around me and led me out of that house. Outside, the February air was sharp and clean. There were police cars everywhere, lights flashing. Neighbors had come out to stare. But all I could focus on was Grandma's hand holding mine, warm and steady and real. She'd borrowed a car from a friend to come get me. As she helped me into the back seat, I saw a bag there. She'd brought clothes for me. Clean clothes that would fit. A warm coat. Even a doll, worn and obviously second-hand, but soft and safe-looking. How did you find me? I asked as she started the car. Her knuckles were white on the steering wheel. I got worried when Patricia stopped answering my letters. More worried when the school called asking where you were. I took the bus back here. Went to the apartment. Empty. Landlord said you'd been gone for weeks. She drove carefully through the city streets, but I could see her jaw working, could feel the anger radiating off her. I knew something bad had happened, knew Patricia had done something. So I started asking around. Took me 3 weeks of knocking on doors, talking to people who didn't want to talk. But finally, someone had seen her walking with you that night. Knew which direction you'd gone. We stopped at a red light, and she turned to look at me. I went to every house in that neighborhood, Louise. Every single one. Showed your picture. Said I'd pay for information. Finally found someone who'd seen children going in, but never coming out of that house. That's when I called the police. But they didn't believe you at first? Her laugh was bitter. No. Said I needed proof. So I sat outside that house for 2 days, watching. Saw enough to make them listen. And here we are. We drove in silence for a while. Then I asked the question that had been burning in my throat. Where's Mama? Grandma's face went hard again. I don't know, baby. But don't you worry about her. You're coming home with me now, back to Ohio. You're going to live with me and Aunt Mary and your cousin Rebecca. You're going to go to school and have friends and be a normal little girl again. What if Mama comes back for me? Grandma pulled the car over then, turned in her seat to face me fully. Louise, listen to me. Your Mama is sick. The kind of sick that makes people do terrible things. What she did to you, that's unforgivable. She doesn't get to come back from that. Do you understand? I nodded, though I didn't really understand. How could a mother sell her child? How could the person who was supposed to love you most in the world trade you for a bottle? But I was 8 years old, and tired and scared, and just wanted to be somewhere safe. The drive to Ohio took 12 hours. Grandma stopped every few hours to make sure I was okay, to buy me food, to let me use the bathroom. I ate my first real meal in 5 weeks at a truck stop diner. Chicken noodle soup and crackers. I threw it up 10 minutes later, my shrunken stomach unable to handle real food. But Grandma just cleaned me up, got me some ginger ale, and we tried again with just the crackers. As we drove through the night, I told her everything. Or at least, as much as an 8-year-old could articulate about what had happened. She listened, her face never changing, but I saw her hands shake sometimes, saw her bite her lip to keep from crying. I'm sorry, Grandma, I said at one point. I'm sorry I'm dirty and broken now. She pulled over again at that, pulled me into her arms right there on the side of the highway. You listen to me, Louise Marie Thompson. You are not dirty, you are not broken, you are a survivor. You are my granddaughter, and you are precious and valuable and loved. What happened to you was not your fault. None of it was your fault. and I will spend the rest of my life making sure you know that. We reached Aunt Mary's house as the sun was rising. It was a small white house with green shutters and a garden out front, even in winter. Normal, safe. Aunt Mary was waiting on the porch, wrapped in a shawl, tears streaming down her face. She ran to the car as we pulled up, yanked open my door, and pulled me into a hug that felt like coming home. "Oh, Louise. Sweet girl, we've been so worried." Behind her, a girl about my age stood in the doorway. My cousin Rebecca, who I'd only met a few times when we were very small. She looked at me shyly, then held out a teddy bear. "This is for you," she said, "for when you have bad dreams." And that's when I finally cried. Really cried. For the first time since Mama had left me in that house, I let myself sob. For what I'd lost, for what I'd endured, for what I'd survived, but also for what I'd found. Family who came looking for me. Family who fought for me. Family who wanted me. That first night in my grandmother's house, I didn't sleep. I lay in the clean bed with soft sheets that smelled like sunshine and fabric softener, staring at the ceiling, waiting for someone to tell me it was all a mistake, that I had to go back. Rebecca slept peacefully in the twin bed across the room, her breathing steady and untroubled. I envied her. She'd never known what it was like to be thrown away. Grandma found me sitting on the floor in the corner of the room when she came to wake us for breakfast. I'd pulled the blanket down there with me, reverting to what had become normal in that terrible house. She didn't say anything, just sat down on the floor next to me, her joints creaking. "Bed's too soft?" she asked gently. I nodded, ashamed. "I'm sorry." "Nothing to be sorry for, baby. How about we make you a little nest on the floor for now, just until you get used to things again?" That's how it started, my journey back to being a normal little girl. Small steps. Sleeping on a mattress on the floor instead of just a blanket. Learning to eat regular meals again without my stomach cramping. Remembering how to play with toys, how to laugh at cartoons, how to exist without constantly watching for danger. The nightmares were the worst part. Every night, I'd wake up screaming, convinced I was back in that locked room. Grandma would come running, hold me until the shaking stopped, remind me where I was. Safe. Home. Loved. She never got impatient, never told me to just get over it. She'd make me warm milk with honey and sit with me until I fell asleep again. 2 weeks after I came to live with them, Grandma took me to see a doctor. Not just any doctor, but one who specialized in helping children who'd been through bad things. Dr. Helen Martinez had a kind face and soft voice. Her office didn't look like a doctor's office at all. It had toys and books and comfortable chairs and a dollhouse in the corner. "Louise," she said at our first meeting, "I want you to know that nothing we talk about in this room will be shared with anyone unless you want me to. This is your safe space. You can say anything here." I didn't talk much that first session, or the second, or the third. But Dr. Martinez was patient. She'd play games with me, let me draw, never pushing too hard. Finally, during our fourth session, while we were playing with the dollhouse, I made the mama doll leave the little girl doll alone in the house. "Why did the mama leave?" Dr. Martinez asked casually, not looking at me directly. "Because the little girl wasn't worth keeping," I said, my voice small. "What makes you think that?" "Because she traded her. For a bottle, like she was just a thing." Dr. Martinez put down the doll she was holding and looked at me. "Louise, I want you to hear something very important. Children are never things. They are never for trading. What happened to you was wrong. It was the grown-ups who did wrong, not you. But if I'd been better." "No." Her voice was firm but kind. "There is nothing you could have done differently. Nothing you could have been that would have changed what your mother chose to do. Her sickness made that choice, not anything about you." We worked on that idea for months, years really, understanding that I hadn't caused what happened, that I couldn't have prevented it, that my worth wasn't determined by my mother's inability to love me more than she loved alcohol. School was another challenge. Grandma enrolled me in the local elementary school, and I was so far behind. Those 5 weeks of captivity plus the chaos before had left gaps in my education. But my new teacher, Mrs. Wright, was patient. She gave me extra help during lunch, sent home practice sheets, never made me feel stupid for not knowing things. The other kids were curious about the new girl who'd appeared in the middle of the school year. Rebecca, bless her, told everyone I was her cousin from the city who'd come to live with them because my mom was sick. It was true enough, and it stopped most of the questions. But I was different from the other children, and they sensed it. I didn't know how to play their games. I hoarded food in my desk. I flinched when adults raised their voices. I watched doors and windows constantly, always planning escape routes. During a fire drill, I completely panicked, convinced that someone was coming to take me away again. Mrs. Wright had to carry me out of the building while I sobbed and shook. The other kids think I'm weird, I told Dr. Martinez. You're not weird, she said. You're healing. And healing isn't always pretty or easy, but every day, you're getting stronger. She was right, though I couldn't see it at the time. Slowly, so slowly, I began to trust again. Grandma was the constant in my life. Every morning, she'd brush my hair and braid it neatly. Every night, she'd tuck me in and tell me she loved me. When I had bad days, when the memories were too strong, she'd take me for walks in the garden and teach me the names of flowers. See how they grow back every spring? She'd say. Even after the hardest winter, they find a way to bloom again. About 6 months after I came to live with them, we got news about Mama. She'd been arrested for public intoxication and was in jail. Grandma sat me down and asked if I wanted to see her. I don't know, I said honestly. Part of me missed her desperately, the Mama from the good moments, the one who danced with me. But another part was terrified of seeing her again. You don't have to decide now, Grandma said. And you don't ever have to see her if you don't want to. But I want you to know you have the choice. I didn't see her then. I wasn't ready. Dr. Martinez said that was okay, that I should take all the time I needed. Forgiveness, if it comes, has to be for you, not for her, she explained. And you may never forgive her. That's okay too. The first anniversary of my rescue was hard. February came with its cold winds and gray skies, and my body remembered even when I tried not to. I had panic attacks. Couldn't sleep. Refused to leave the house. Grandma stayed home from work and just held me, rocking me like I was a much smaller child. I should be over it by now, I cried. Says who? She asked. Healing doesn't have a timeline, baby. You take all the time you need. Slowly, I began to make friends. A girl named Jenny who lived next door and loved to read as much as I did. We'd sit in her treehouse and devour Nancy Drew mysteries, creating our own detective agency. A boy named Thomas who was in my class and didn't mind that I was different. He'd lost his dad in a car accident and understood about carrying sadness. I learned to sleep in a bed again, to eat without hiding food, to trust that the adults in my life weren't going to hurt me or abandon me. I learned to laugh again, really laugh, the kind that makes your belly hurt. I learned to be a child again, even though I'd always carried the knowledge of how unsafe the world could be. 3 years after my rescue, when I was 11, I finally felt ready to confront what had happened to me in a bigger way. I asked Dr. Martinez if there was anything I could do to help other kids who were going through what I'd gone through. You're very young to be thinking about that, she said carefully. But I'm not too young to know what it's like, I replied. Maybe I could write letters or something. To kids who are scared, let them know it gets better. That's how I started volunteering, in small ways at first, writing cards for children in foster care, helping Grandma knit blankets for the local shelter, speaking to my class about recognizing when friends might be in trouble at home. It made me feel less helpless, less like a victim and more like a survivor. But I never forgot Sarah, my friend from that terrible place. I asked about her, but the social workers could only tell me she'd been placed with a foster family in another state. I wrote her letters, care of the Child Welfare Office, but I never knew if she got them. I hope she was healing too, finding her own way back to the light. The truth was, healing wasn't a destination. It was a journey, one that would continue for the rest of my life. There would always be triggers. Always be moments when the past reached out with cold fingers to drag me back. But I was learning to fight back, to choose hope over fear, love over abandonment. And through it all, Grandma was my anchor. The woman who'd traveled hundreds of miles and knocked on every door to find me. Who'd faced down monsters to bring me home. Who showed me every single day that I was worth fighting for, worth loving, worth saving. The call came on a rainy Tuesday afternoon when I was 43 years old. I was in my office at the community center, reviewing grant applications for our youth programs, when my assistant knocked on the door. "Louise, there's someone on the phone. Says she's an old friend. Her name is Sarah." My heart stopped. Sarah. After all these years, I picked up the phone with trembling hands. "Louise, is it really you?" The voice was older, rougher, but I knew it instantly. "Sarah." I couldn't say anything else. 35 years collapsed into nothing, and suddenly I was 8 years old again, holding her hand in the dark. "I told you I'd find you," she said, and then she was crying, and so was I. We talked for 3 hours that first day. She'd tracked me down through the internet, found an article about the community center I'd founded, seen my picture, and known it was me. She'd had her own long journey of healing. Foster homes, some good, some bad, a teenage pregnancy. Years of struggling with trust, with relationships, with the shadows that terrible place had left in both of us. "But I made it," she said. "I'm a nurse now, pediatric ward. I help kids who are scared and alone, and I think about us every day." We met in person a month later, at a coffee shop halfway between our cities. I knew her immediately. Same dark hair, though streaked with silver now. Same eyes, though they'd lost some of their hollowness. We hugged and cried and probably alarmed everyone else in the shop. "Look at us," she said, laughing through her tears. "We survived." "We did more than survive," I corrected. "We thrived." And it was true. Against all odds, despite everything that had been done to us, we'd built good lives. Sarah had 2 children of her own, both in college. She'd married a kind man who understood her past and loved her anyway. She'd taken her pain and transformed it into purpose, becoming the kind of caregiver she'd needed when she was young. As for me, my journey had been just as transformative. After college, where I'd studied social work and psychology, I'd come back to the community where everything had gone wrong. Not to the exact neighborhood, that held too many ghosts, but close enough. I'd started small, volunteering at shelters, working with at-risk youth, slowly building toward a bigger dream. The Emma Louise Thompson Center for Children and Families opened when I was 35, named after the little girl I'd been, the one who'd needed somewhere safe to go. We provided emergency shelter, counseling, education support, and most importantly, intervention services for families in crisis. We worked to identify children at risk before they disappeared into the shadows, before they became statistics. "How did you forgive her?" Sarah asked me that day in the coffee shop. She meant my mother, of course. It was the question everyone asked when they learned my story. "I'm not sure I did," I admitted. "Not completely, but I learned to understand her sickness, to separate the mother I'd loved from the addiction that consumed her. Mama had died when I was 22. Liver failure, alone in a charity hospital 2 states away. I'd gone to her funeral, stood at her grave, and felt empty. Not sad exactly, not angry anymore. Just empty. Grandma had come with me, held my hand while I said goodbye to the woman who'd given me life, and then nearly destroyed it. I used to think forgiveness was about her, I told Sarah. But my therapist helped me understand it was about me, about not carrying that poison in my heart anymore. I forgave her so I could be free. Sarah nodded. She understood. We both carried scars that would never fully heal, but we'd learned to build beautiful lives around them. The center grew over the years. What started as a single building with a staff of 5 became a campus with transitional housing, a charter school for at-risk youth, job training programs, and a clinic. We helped thousands of children, but I never forgot that we couldn't help them all. For every child we reached, there were others hidden away in locked rooms, trapped by the people who should have protected them. I never married, never had children of my own. The shadows of my past made trust difficult, made the idea of being responsible for a child terrifying, but I became a mother in other ways. To the teenage girl who came to us pregnant and alone. To the little boy whose parents chose drugs over diapers. to the siblings who hid in our doorway on a cold night because home wasn't safe anymore. "Don't you regret not having your own family?" a volunteer once asked me. "This is my family," I'd answered, gesturing to the children doing homework in our common room. Every one of them. Grandma lived to see the center's 10th anniversary. At 91, she cut the ribbon on our new wing, her hands steady despite her age. "I'm so proud of you, baby," she whispered, using the endearment she'd never stopped calling me. "You took the worst thing and made something beautiful from it." She died peacefully in her sleep 6 months later. At her funeral, the church was packed. Children she'd helped raise, families she'd supported, colleagues from the factory where she'd worked double shifts to pay for my therapy and education. Person after person stood up to speak about how Agnes Thompson had changed their lives. But I knew I was her greatest rescue mission, the granddaughter she'd refused to give up on. Sarah became part of the center's work too. She joined our board of directors, helped establish our medical clinic, brought her expertise in pediatric trauma. Together, we created protocols for identifying and helping children who showed signs of trafficking or abuse. We trained teachers, social workers, police officers, anyone who might be the first to notice a child in danger. "We can't save them all," Sarah said once after a particularly hard case, a little girl whose situation was heartbreakingly familiar. "No," I agreed. "But we save the ones we can, and we teach them to save others. That's how we break the cycle." That's what my life became about. Breaking cycles. The cycle of addiction that had claimed my mother. The cycle of abuse that had nearly claimed me. The cycle of silence that allowed children to disappear into the shadows. Every child we helped was a victory not just for them, but for the little girl I'd been, the one who'd believed she wasn't worth saving. I think about that little girl often, 8 years old, sitting in a corner of a locked room, convinced that her life was over before it had really begun. I wish I could tell her that she would survive. That she would do more than survive. That she would grow up to be strong and capable and loved. That she would save other children from the darkness that had tried to claim her. But maybe, in a way, I do tell her. Every time I hold a frightened child and promise them they're safe now. Every time I testify in court to make sure a trafficker stays behind bars. Every time I speak at conferences about the signs of child trafficking that everyone should know. Every time I refuse to let another child disappear into the shadows. My story isn't unique. That's the heartbreaking truth. There are too many children whose parents choose their demons over their babies. Too many locked rooms. Too many Mr. Carls. Too many mothers walking away with bottles clutched to their chests while their children scream for them to come back. But there are also grandmothers who refuse to give up. Teachers who notice when children disappear. Neighbors who make phone calls. Police officers who take reports seriously. Therapists who help piece shattered spirits back together. Communities that wrap around broken children and refuse to let them fall. I am Louise Thompson. I am a survivor. I am a warrior. I am proof that the worst thing that happens to you doesn't have to be the last thing that defines you. I am the 8-year-old girl who was sold for a bottle of whiskey, and I am the woman who built a sanctuary for other lost children. This is my story. It's a hard story, an ugly story in places, but it's also a story of hope, of resilience, of the amazing capacity of the human spirit to heal and grow and transform pain into purpose. It's a story I tell not for sympathy, but for strength. To let other survivors know they're not alone. To let people who work with children know what to look for. To let a society that too often looks away understand that these children exist, and they matter, and they deserve to be saved. Every night, before I go to sleep in my safe apartment with its multiple locks and security system, because yes, some fears never fully fade, I think about all the children out there in the dark. The ones waiting for someone to come. The ones who've stopped believing anyone will. And I make the same promise I've made every night for 20 years. We're coming for you. Hold on, we're coming. Because that's what love does. It seeks, it fights, it rescues, it never gives up. Just like my grandmother never gave up on me.